My father-in-law raised his wine glass at the head of the table and said, "Someone get the help another chair," and 31 people laughed. I was already standing. I'd been standing for 20 minutes, carving the turkey I'd bought. In the kitchen I'd paid to renovate. In the house I quietly held the second mortgage on. I set the carving knife down. I smiled. I found a folding chair myself. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters later. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain that the help comment had been a joke for 6 years. The kind of joke that starts as an insult and calcifies into a nickname nobody apologizes for. I just picked up the chair, sat at the corner of my own family's table, and ate cold stuffing while they toasted people who had contributed nothing but their opinions. That was the last Thanksgiving I would spend making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 44 years old. For 19 years, I've quietly owned and operated Meridian Structural Group, a commercial engineering firm that designs the bones of buildings you've driven past 1,000 times and never once looked up at. I don't talk about my work at family dinners. I learned early that talking about structural load calculations at Thanksgiving gets you exactly one polite nod before the conversation moves to something more interesting, like my brother-in-law's fantasy football league. I married my wife, Claire, 14 years ago. Her family, the Whitfields, are old money adjacent. Not actually wealthy anymore, but committed to behaving as though they still were. Her father, Harold Whitfield, ran a regional furniture chain into the ground in the early 2000s and has spent every year since talking about the empire he used to have. For 14 years, I paid for things quietly. The roof on Harold and Linda's house, after the hailstorm insurance wouldn't fully cover. Claire's younger brother's rehab twice. Her sister's wedding, the second one, after the first husband turned out to be a story nobody tells at dinner anymore. I never asked for credit. I never needed it. I thought love looked like showing up and not keeping score. I had 19 years of structural integrity behind my name, and at their table I had none. Welcome back to Dad's sweet revenge. Grab your coffee, get comfortable because this is a long one, and it's a good one. If you've ever been the quiet one who paid for everything and got thanked for nothing, this story is for you. Let's get into it. The help thing started innocently enough. Year 1 of marriage, I showed up to a Whitfield gathering in work clothes, straight from a job site, and Harold made a joke. "Careful, Claire, your husband looks like he's here to fix the pipes." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. It was fine. It was one joke. But jokes in families like the Whitfields don't stay jokes. They become architecture. By year 3, I was the help at every gathering, said with a wink that implied affection but functioned as a wall. I was the one who fixed the sink during the party instead of attending it. The one who was handed the grill tongs the moment I walked in the door, before anyone said hello. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Claire knew who I really was, and that was enough. But Claire started doing it too. Small things first. Introducing me to new people as my husband. He's handy instead of he runs an engineering firm. Laughing along when her mother, Linda, said things like Danny doesn't really do the intellectual conversations, he's more of a doer. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters later. I paid for Claire's niece's tuition deposit at a private school in year 7. Nobody at that table knows that. I co-signed Harold's business loan for a furniture restoration shop that failed within 18 months. In year 9. I never mentioned it again and neither did he, except to occasionally reference when I had capital behind me, as if the capital had been his own. What Harold didn't know was that I kept records. Not out of suspicion, out of habit. 19 years of running a firm teaches you that verbal agreements evaporate, but paper survives. Every loan, every gift dressed as a loan, every wire transfer, documented, dated, filed. By year 12, the joke had a new layer. Claire's sister Meredith started calling me Reyes instead of Daniel, like I was staff. Her husband, a hedge fund analyst who talked about alpha unprompted at every meal, would ask me things like, "So Daniel, you still doing the, what is it, contracting?" Every single Thanksgiving, as though I hadn't corrected him 11 times before. I corrected no one. I smiled. I passed the potatoes. I paid the property tax bill on the lake house that was technically still in Harold's name, but that I'd been quietly covering since his business folded. Because Claire had asked me to in year 6 with tears in her eyes, and I had said yes because that's what you do when you love someone. That was the last time I would confuse loving someone with erasing myself for them. This year's Thanksgiving was at the lake house. My lake house in every way that mattered except the deed. I arrived early as always to set up. I brought the turkey, the wine, the good bourbon Harold likes to claim he introduced me to. I spent 2 hours in the kitchen while the rest of the family arrived, greeted each other, took photos by the dock I'd repaired that spring. Nobody offered to help. Nobody needed to ask why I wasn't in the photos. I wasn't in the photos because I was never expected to be in them. At dinner, Harold stood to give his annual toast. He does this every year. A long, meandering speech about family, resilience, the Whitfield name enduring in spite of everything. This year, he thanked Meredith's husband for bringing real financial wisdom into this family. He thanked Claire's brother for finally getting his life together. 18 months sober, which I was, in fact, quietly still paying the monthly cost of his therapist for. Then he looked around the table, ran out of names, and said it. And someone get the help another chair. 31 people laughed. Claire laughed. My own wife laughed. A half-second delay. Like she caught herself but not fast enough. I stood up. I walked to the hall closet, got a folding chair, set it at the corner of the table and sat down. I ate in near silence for the rest of the meal. Nobody noticed. That was the part that actually hurt. Not the joke itself, 14 years old and threadbare, but the fact that 31 people in a house I paid the taxes on didn't notice a grown man quietly disappear at his own table. I didn't know it yet, but I would never sit at that table again. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't say anything the next morning, either. When I made coffee for everyone and Linda asked if I could take a look at the dishwasher. It's been making a noise. I looked at the dishwasher. I told her it needed a new pump, which was true, and that I'd send someone out this week, which was also true. I just didn't say the someone would be a contractor I'd pay, not myself, and I didn't say it would be the last thing of theirs I ever fixed. The decision didn't come as an explosion. It became the way structural failure actually happens. Not a sudden collapse, but a slow redistribution of load until the thing that was holding everything up simply isn't there anymore, and nobody notices until it's too late to matter. I drove home Sunday with Claire. She talked about the weekend, about how nice it was, about her father's toast, and said, laughing, God, he really does love calling you the help, doesn't he? Like it was an affectionate quirk instead of 14 years of erasure. I said, yeah, he really does. That was the last time I would let a joke like that pass without cost. Monday morning, I called my attorney. Not Claire's family's attorney, mine. A man named Ted Okafor who had handled Meridian's contracts for over a decade and knew, better than anyone, exactly how much quiet capital I'd poured into people who couldn't spell my last name correctly on a card. I told him I wanted an accounting. Everything. Every loan, every gift, every tax payment, every tuition deposit, every mortgage assist. From the day I married Claire to the folding chair at Thanksgiving. He asked if I wanted to pursue repayment. I told him I wanted the truth on paper first. The rest I'd decide after. Took 3 weeks to compile. Ted's paralegal built a full ledger, 19 years condensed into a single spreadsheet with a bottom line that made even Ted go quiet for a second when he read it aloud to me over the phone. $412,000. Not counting interest. Not counting the labor I donated on the dock, the roof, the kitchen renovation nobody at that table thought to ask who'd swung the hammer for. I want you to hold onto that number because it matters later. The lake house was the centerpiece. Harold had refinanced it years ago under a private loan I'd co-signed. One that had quietly rolled forward twice with my signature and no one else's. Legally, if I called that loan due and Harold couldn't refinance elsewhere, which at 71 with no income and a failed furniture business on his record, he couldn't, the house would need to be sold to satisfy it, and I held first position on the debt. I didn't do this out of cruelty. I did it out of arithmetic. 19 years of subsidizing people who called me the help, and I finally asked myself a simple question. What would happen to the Whitfield family's entire lifestyle if I simply stopped? The answer was that it would collapse. Quietly, structurally, the way things collapse when the load-bearing wall finally admits it's tired. I called the loan. Formally, through Ted, with 30 days' notice, exactly as the paperwork required. I didn't call Harold myself. I let the letter do it. I also, separately, restructured Meridian's ownership documents, nothing dramatic, just cleaning up something I'd been meaning to do for years. removing Claire as a beneficiary on the company's key person life insurance policy and replacing her with a trust for our 2 children, administered independently of either of us. It wasn't punitive. It was overdue. A business that had grown to 41 employees shouldn't have had a single point of emotional failure in its succession plan. Then I booked a flight. Not dramatic. Just 3 nights in Portland for a legitimate site consultation Meridian had been putting off for months. I needed distance while the letters landed, and I needed to not be in the house when Claire found out what I'd done, because I wasn't ready yet to explain something I was still, myself, working out how to feel about. I didn't know it yet, but by the time I landed back home, 4 missed calls from Harold and 2 from Meredith would be waiting, and none from Claire. The calls started within 6 hours of the letter arriving. Harold first, voice shaking with an anger that had nowhere useful to go, since I hadn't broken a single law and every dollar was documented in my name. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail the way I'd let so many things go for 19 years, except this time the not answering was the point. Meredith called next, then texted, "This is insane, you're really gonna do this to Dad?" I didn't respond. I had, in fact, already done it. The verb tense in her text was generous to a future that had already closed. Claire's texts were different, shorter, colder in the specific way that people get when they're more afraid than angry. "We need to talk. Call me." Then, an hour later, "Did you actually call the loan on my parents' house?" I texted back 4 words. "Yes. Call your attorney. Not mine. Hers." Because for the first time in 14 years, I wasn't going to be the one holding both sides of a problem her family created. For 11 days I said almost nothing. I went to work. I ran job sites. I picked up my kids from school and made dinner and didn't mention the Whitfields once, even when my youngest asked why Grandpa hadn't called this week. The silence wasn't punishment. It was the first time in over a decade I had stopped performing availability for people who had never once asked whether I needed anything back. Ted handled the correspondence. Harold's attorney tried 3 angles: hardship, family obligation, and appeal to the spirit of the original agreement. Ted's response to each was the same. The spirit of the agreement was documented on page 1, and the terms were the terms. Claire moved into the guest room on day 4. We were, both of us, quietly recalculating what 14 years had actually been built on. That was the last time I would mistake her silence for support. It had, I was starting to understand, always been permission for her family and by extension for me to disappear a little more each year. The lake house sold in February, 11 weeks after the notice. After the loan was satisfied, Harold and Linda cleared just under $90,000. Enough for a modest condo 2 hours from where they used to hold court every Thanksgiving. I didn't attend the closing. I didn't need to. My name had already done its work. Meridian, in the meantime, had its best year in company history. Freed of the quiet drain of subsidizing a family that resented my success while depending on it, I redirected capital toward the firm instead. We broke ground on a second regional office in March. I closed a $6.2 million municipal contract in May, the kind of project that used to feel impossible to focus on while managing everyone else's emergencies. Claire and I separated in April. Not with venom, with exhaustion mostly on both sides and a mutual, overdue recognition that a marriage where one person quietly funds everyone's dignity but their own isn't really a marriage. It's an arrangement. The settlement was clean because for once, everything already had paperwork. I bought a house in June. Smaller than the lake house, better built. I designed part of the foundation myself, which felt, for the first time in years, like the kind of quiet joke only I understood. By September, I'd been named to a regional business journal's 40 under 45 in commercial development list, 11 months late for the under part, a fact I found genuinely funny. Harold, I heard through Meredith, saw the profile. He didn't call. I didn't call him either. That was the last silence I'd ever apologize for. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. Revenge, real revenge, is just the moment you stop paying for your own erasure and let the people who built their comfort on your silence discover what their comfort actually cost. I didn't destroy the Whitfields. I simply stopped being their foundation, and gravity did the rest. For 19 years, I confused being needed with being valued. They are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the exact size of the folding chair someone hands you at your own table. I don't hate Harold. I don't even think about that joke much anymore. But I keep the folding chair, the actual one, in my garage now as a reminder. Not of what he did to me, of what I let happen, for far too long, in exchange for a peace that was never mine to keep. If the story hit something in you, if you've ever been the one who paid and fixed and showed up and got handed a folding chair for it, you're not alone and it's not too late to stop. That's what this channel is for. Subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge for more stories like Daniel's, and tell me in the comments, what's the moment you'd finally stop staying quiet? I'll see you in the next one.